D-Day was the peak of my life as a soldier.
They call it the longest day, and to me it was one of the shortest days that I ever experienced. The hours just seemed to go by so fast.
The finest moment in my life, unquestionably.
Having been through a fair amount of action before, I knew what it was going to be like. I had no illusions.
It's been the greatest day of my life, now that it's over.
D-Day was the greatest world-shaping event this century. Everybody who took part in any form must be proud of that.
For me and for everyone who was there, it was a day that changed our lives completely.
The when and where of arrival is not for publication, but the why is common knowledge. Another great influx of American units for the invasion of Europe.
For an entire generation of young men and women who gathered in Britain in 1944, D-Day, June the 6th, was to be a day of deliverance. A day when, after years of grief and fear, bombing and rationing, the German occupation of Europe, completed at Dunkirk 4 years earlier, began at last to be rolled back.
When the balloon goes up, these fully trained men will participate in the greatest military expedition in history, first putting their way right into Führer's face.
I was a depression baby. And my dad did anything he could to make money. He sold berry juice, he sold equipment, and bought cold meats from a packing company and put them in the back of the car and went out and sold them door to door. During the Depression, anything to bring money into the house. It was tough going, but he always worked at something. He always done something to bring food in the house.
16,000 of us embarked all told, men from every province of Canada. And as each ship got underway, our new Canadian battle flag broke at the masthead.
Just a small rural town. There was no industries, mostly where farm people come in and buy their groceries and do their shopping and their hardware, machinery and things like that.
What was your job before you joined up?
I didn't have a job. I couldn't get a job, no. During the Depression years, there was no such things as jobs. There are very few and far between.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization.
It was only a mining village, a small mining village, and times was very hard then before the war. They talk about unemployment today. There was more in them days. And wages was very, very low.
What was your father?
And my father was a miner. And there was 6 of us in the family, 5 boys and a girl.
I was at a public school at Caterham in 1935 when our hockey team was invited to tour Hitler's Germany. All the German teams were desperately anxious to beat us. One could see that the nation was being prepared for war. Indeed, when we got back to Caterham, I proposed a debating subject that Nazi rule in Germany would inevitably lead to war.
The prospect of war put the world back to work, not least the factories of Nazi Germany.
Hitler promised to make all things better in Germany, and he made it. We had 7 million unemployed persons. 2 years later, we had no unemployment persons. We had no trouble on the streets. So most people, I think more than 90%, were zufrieden, satisfied.
It was 7 days a week, most weeks. In the war, you were really interested in getting on with the job and having fun and sleeping off the excesses. We were great dancers because you dance the night away in nightclubs, because very often the boyfriends were up on very short leaves and going back on a milk train.
There was an element of here today, gone tomorrow. A lot of relationships, one-night stands, if you want to call them that, were based on the fact that a girl liked a chap and thought that perhaps he wouldn't be there much longer, and was prepared to go further with him than she would normally. I think that happened. Certainly happened with the RAF, as you know.
And with you?
I did all right.
I had an American boyfriend. They were very, very brash, very unsubtle, I think. But nice, kind. They could supply you with things like nylons and all sorts of funny things that we couldn't get. I had one boyfriend who brought me back a rubber hot water bottle from Bermuda, I think it was.
Some wartime love affairs ended in marriage. Many did not. But the Americans, over here and overpaid, made themselves at home.
We landed in Bude in the wintertime, and the first night we went to the pub, we noticed these English gentlemen playing darts. They saw we were interested, and they asked if we'd join them. And I said, sure, I'd like to. We played darts at home. What I should have been tipped off is when he reached in their pocket and pulled out a little medal with their own darts. They carried their darts with them, see. So they said, we usually play like for a beer. The winner gets a free beer. And I should have known then. I think it cost me around $2,000 to find out that I couldn't play darts. And
We really became like part of the various English families with whom we lived.
Who did you billet with?
A family by the name of Sandeman. He was a retired major from the Far East. He and I used to play a lot of chess together when we had time to.
Mary and Maisie were two maids there who worked for the Sandermans, and we would either be served in bed or we'd get downstairs in the kitchen in the mornings, and they would prepare eggs, which were a premium thing at that time, and we'd have sausages and toast for breakfast, and we never told the troops because we didn't want anybody else moving in there with us.
The Germans had become used to the good life in France, just as the Americans were comfortable with their friendly occupation of Britain. Today, Hans von Luck, once a Panzer commander, guides American tourists as they return on their annual pilgrimages to the Normandy beaches.
I personally had some very good friends in France. The commandant in Paris at that time was a General von Boineburg. He was the regiment commander in Russia of my division. And he said to me, you will get a very nice flat to stay there. And I got a flat near the Invalides and a penthouse belonging to a Swiss, and the Swiss left because there was no business anymore. So he gave me his. And said, all of my wine is for you. And he showed me hundreds and hundreds of bottles. I said, no, 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 I will take care of them. Eventually we came to a conclusion. For one bottle I paid him 1 franc.
How many francs did you pay him?
I got about 100 bottles. Chambertin, 29. Veuve Clicquot Rosé, champagne, 29. Very good stuff.
Franc a bottle?
Franc a bottle.
A bargain?
A bargain,
Everyone knew the Allies would soon invade. The only doubt was when and where. Lady Jane Bethell had been given a job with a top-secret espionage directorate in London.
And so I trotted along in February 1944 and was absolutely poleaxed, because the very first day at the office they told me the date of the invasion.
But did you talk about it?
Not outside the office, never. Never. And once you know something, you can't join in the speculation, you see. You have to sort of sit rather silently in the corner while everybody else is saying, well, I think it'll be so-and-so and so-and-so. And once you know, you can't join in.
The obvious route for the Allies to take was the short distance from Kent to the Pas de Calais. Less likely was the 100-mile journey to Normandy. But crucially, there was no harbour in which to land the troops and supplies.
We couldn't risk an invasion which depended solely on supplies coming over the beaches. It would be very unlikely that we could afford in lives to capture a port. The solution was a British solution entirely from British engineers. They thought up the idea, fantastic, unbelievable, that if we can't capture a port, we'll build one. We'll build one on the English shore, 100 miles from here. We'll take it over to this beach down below, and we'll build it.
On beaches all over the south of England, the invasion forces practiced the landings that lay ahead. They rehearsed and rehearsed again. But the rehearsals had their own cost. On the night of April 27th at Slapton in Devon, German E-boats surprised the American troops as they practiced. Many landing craft were hit and started to sink.
The fire was in the middle of the ship. That was a flaming inferno. And I couldn't go in there, and the guy screaming in there couldn't get out. So I just had to dog the hatches and...
Dog the hatches?
Close all the watertight compartments to preserve the integrity of the ship so it would float. Because they couldn't get out, nobody could help them. And then I went topside and waited.
Did you have any idea how many men there were behind that door that you had to shut?
A minimum of 44, perhaps others. And they're probably still there.
What do you mean?
They're still with the ship. They went down with it. Most of us just gradually climbed down the cargo net and eased into the water. I was grateful to be alive. I felt sorry for the poor guys that did not survive, but there's not much you could do about it. Things had to go forward.
But you'd had to close the hatch?
I had to close the hatch, yeah.
The tension was very high. Everybody was pumped up, you know, ready to go because we've been waiting such a long time and getting tired of all the exercises and see, let's get it over with so we can get home, the ones that can make it.
It's a very complex planning process. You have waves, assault waves, and so many craft in the single wave, and follow-up waves. They have to be timed. So it becomes a choreographic event to land these people, and you have to have the proper mix. You need infantrymen, you need engineers, you've got to get some heavy weapons ashore, you need some tanks, you need some artillery, you need the medics.
D-Day was not just D-Day. D-Day was the start of a period of 14 days for which Second Army was in charge of all arrangements. And we had to ensure that the supply of stores kept going for 14 days and left a continuum going on after that.
England has become one vast ordnance dump and field park. I've driven through it today for the best part of 100 miles. The roads crammed with military traffic and lined, often enough on both sides, with vehicles of all kinds.
We were put together with the London Scottish Regiment. Each American and British sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major had an opposite number or numbers, and the jobs were done together. We all messed together. The only difference was the British were served plenty of tea and we were served plenty of coffee.
We were all brought into concentration areas. Our concentration area was the New Forest.
In New Forest, there were 50 or more small camps where the great shuffling of the huge American and British divisions occurred.
The interesting thing was the build-up of troops, which troops would land on which days and so on, which divisions would land and how many divisions we would have on shore against the expected concentration of the Germans against us, and how many divisions they would get into the beachhead area.
When we'd built these camps, we was put in them, we was interned in them. Security got to be that tight.
It was just before we were quarantined that I received a letter that my brother was killed at Monte Cassino. Of course, he had just got married a year before he went to Italy, and his baby daughter was born, but 3 months before. I don't think he even had received the first letter telling him that he was a father.
While I was in the camps, these Shondiers, French Canadians, they had commando knives. And the amount of time as they spent sharpening those and holding them up to a fine edge was unbelievable.
I remember that night so well, the eve of D-Day, because when we went to it, one of the fellas said, gee, I wonder how we're going to react. Will we turn tail and run? Will we lack courage to carry out our duties? And we kept reassuring, oh, no, I know you, John, you're going to do all right. Jack, you'll be all right.
I remember Bill Hoffman, and he thought I was asleep in the sergeant's room where we were, and he said, you know, he said, tomorrow some of us are going to die. Now, he said, if it's between me and Sergeant KUHN, I hope it's me for this reason. He has a wife and daughter at home. And that hit me right, and I've never forgotten that, the unselfishness of someone to say something like that.
The sun was just setting, the sky was a wonderful apricot color, everything still. And then suddenly there was a low murmur. We turned round to see that the sky behind us was absolutely filling with tiny little black dots that were rising from the land. And as they came nearer and nearer, absolute amazement on the part of everyone, because they were all planes, and the sky was absolutely black with planes. They almost seemed wingtip to wingtip.
I knew that that was the night of the invasion, and I think I spent most of the night hanging out the window because you could hear them, the airplanes with the gliders going over. You could hear the roar. And I knew what it was, and nobody else knew what it was.
The order went out to all troops that there was no prisoners to be taken for the first 48 hours.
What do you mean, no prisoners?
No prisoners to be taken. In other words, you've got to kill them. Because I don't think they anticipated or couldn't anticipate what they was going to do with them.
Everybody knew that in order to take prisoners, you've got to have at least 2 men. And the more prisoners you take, the more men have to guard them.
And you had few enough men.
And we had few enough men as it is, and we didn't want any excess baggage.
Everybody that went in was pretty well prepared to give their life if they had to. The idea was to take as many as you could of the enemy if you were going to get killed. Because we didn't go there thinking that we were invisible, that we weren't going to get, not have any casualties.
Did you think you'd survive?
Never. Never.
D-Day has come. Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern face of Hitler's European fortress.
D-Day had been planned for June the 5th, 1944. Bad weather postponed by 24 hours the biggest, most ambitious military invasion in history.
The big guns were blazing, of course, from the back, and they sounded like freight trains going over top of us.
We landed some 72,000 troops, I think, on the first day, and we had some 17,000 vehicles, what have you. The British had more.
I only got frightened once. The first time I stepped on the beach and Didn't get over it until the war finished.
I don't think anybody who has not been in a military action is capable of grasping the intensity of fear that one feels.
The horror of it is that you couldn't stop, you know, and help your buddy when you see him fall, because you've got to keep going, you've got a job to do, and you know you're not going to help by stopping him, because you'll be the next one to get it.
There were wounded GIs, feet blown off, vehicles, half tracks that had run into mines and exploded ammunition. It looked like a big mess.
A load of barbed wire and entanglement, shell holes, and equipment lying shattered and blown up, men lying here, there and everywhere, some wounded, some dead.
One young lieutenant came to me and he said, and he held my hand and we lay flat. "It's all right for you, Padre. You've got everything. But some of us here haven't got anything. And it's hell."
When you're under very heavy bombardment, say a mortar fire or bombs or shell fire, you always feel that you personally are the target of all this stuff coming over.
The first German I actually saw was a dead one. He lay there with his helmet at the side of him, and a bullet had gone clean through his helmet, and it was a horrible sight to see.
We were Jewish, and then we left Germany in 1936. I felt very proud to be able to serve America, the country that had let us in, that had accepted us. Grateful.
Even given that, you might be face to face with Germans with whom you might have grown up.
Yes, possibly.
Did that enter your thinking at all?
Not at all, because I didn't feel like I was a German any longer.
What's your chief memory of that moment?
Get the hell out of it as quick as you could.
On that first day, despite the German resistance, the British and Canadians established their beachheads Sword, Juno and Gold. The Americans secured their foothold at Utah. Only at the beach codenamed Omaha were the American assault troops in danger of being pushed back into the sea.
If we were unable to make the landing on Omaha, the German might come through that area onto the beach and unhook the British on our left and work their way around the other way. It would have been a very dangerous situation.
Crucially, the Germans held back their major reserves in the Pas de Calais. They still believed what the Allies wanted them to believe, that the major thrust would come, eventually, across the shortest route, from Kent to Calais. Panzer Colonel Hans von Luck was worried about this indecision.
3 days before D-Day, Rommel was in Normandy visiting my unit, and he said, "I still believe it might be Dover-Calais." And General Marx, he said, "As far as I know the British, they will go to church on Sunday, and on Monday they will come." And he was right. And Rommel told Hitler, Rommel told us. He told everybody, if we can't throw the Allied back into the sea within 24 hours, then it's over.
Being in an aircraft, you can't hear anything at all. Everything's sort of like slow motion, and down below there, and we saw soldiers leaping out of landing craft and running ashore.
What did you feel for those men?
Great sympathy, I suppose.
Time has softened the scars of that battle that took place for the guns at Pointe du Hoc, overlooking the vulnerable American beaches of Omaha and Utah.
When we hit the beach and the ramp went down, I was shot through the right side, through the muscle. I didn't hit any vital organs or anything. It just spun me around, burn, that's all. You get over that real quick, and we started out anyway to accomplish the mission. The Germans were firing at us, machine gunning us, dropping grenades on us, anything they could do, cut the ropes, anything to prevent us from scaling those cliffs.
And when we got up, there was a German soldier to our right front behind a piece of large cement, telling us to surrender, and we're telling him to surrender. Now, nobody's firing. We're trying to argue this guy or to talk to him into surrendering. All of a sudden, he jumped up and ran up over the bank, and he's probably still running.
We saw the emplacements. I saw one of them that looked like it had a gun barrel sticking out of it. It was a telephone pole. But when we got to the positions, there were no guns there.
And he said to me, Jack, he said, those guns have to be around here somewhere. So he had noticed some imprint in the ground here, and he said, looks like something came down here. So we went down this dirt road. Walking down this road to giving each other cover, I heard Len say, there are the guns. Now, he had prefaced this with a little profanity, which sounded real good at the time. He said, there are the guns.
It was just dumb luck. We couldn't believe our eyes. It didn't appear to be a guard or anyone in this position. And these are 5 big coastal guns, 155 millimeters, and they're big.
We heard talking as we moved toward this hedgerow, and we looked over, and there was a unit of German soldiers about 75 to 100 yards away from us, almost platoon size, and there was an officer standing out there like a clipboard, and he was probably calling names. They had no idea we were there.
We each carried a thermite grenade. It melts metal, makes just a little pop. You can't hear it. And we laid that on the traversing mechanism or the elevating mechanism or the breech block so that it would melt them together, the metal together, so you couldn't use any of these gears.
We weren't more than probably 5 to 10 yards away. There was a tremendous explosion. We were knocked to the ground, and everything come down on us and rained dust on us. And we set track records getting back to our unit.
I'm not one to know how many Germans we killed. We didn't have body counts in World War II. All I can say is our Rangers gave a good account of himself in the eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with the enemy.
I must have hit him in the soft part of the body, but he ran down, I'd say, 20 yards from where we were, at least 20 yards before he dropped. I had a moment of elation, not that I had killed him, but that he hadn't killed me.
I really learned a dreadful thing in World War II. You get a good feeling when you kill an enemy. I always did. Now, that may not sound Christian-like or whatever, but I think, and I've learned that I think men do enjoy killing under certain circumstances.
The task of the British Parachute Brigade was to take the bridge over the River Orme.
The paratroops are landing. They're landing all around me as I speak. They've come in from the sea, and they're fluttering down, and they're just about the best thing that we've seen for a good many hours.
The Para's objective was to prevent German Panzer units in the Pas de Calais using the bridges to threaten the beachheads.
Out of the 610 men that we dropped in 7th Para, we had by mid-morning of D-Day 240 left. I'd lost my 2 closest friends. And then we lost a lot more. We lost about 60 killed and wounded that morning around the bridge. On the way, I saw a glint of metal and could discern a figure lying behind a little hillock. And I thought it was a sniper. I went down to the riverbed, which is on our right, and sort of crawled along the bank where I was out of sight. And I eventually popped my head up, and by this time I was within 50 yards of this position. There was one of our own chaps. He was dead. And when I went to look at him, he was a young teenager that I remembered well by sight. And he just had a little hole in his forehead. No blood, nothing at all, just a hole there.
As people were landing, especially the follow-up troops, they were getting what I termed beachitis. As soon as they saw the bombs dropping, they were taking cover by putting their noses into the sand. So I stood on the top of the dune and said, "Come on, get forward." And one trooper, or private, picked his Bren gun up and went forward. Mark, there were a line of houses. staring at us 100 yards ahead, and they could have been occupied by Germans. Then I saw, to my amazement, a young, dark French girl cycling down to the beach.
What did you do?
I gave her a wolf whistle.
The girl was Jacqueline Bernard. She was one of twins. 3 weeks before D-Day, her sister, Marie-Denise, had been killed by Allied bombing. Only a few days before that, Marie-Denise had sent her twin Jacqueline a birthday present.
Well, I thought of my bathing costume of my sister gave me for my birthday and took my bicycle and went along the beach.
Where had you left it?
In that bathing hut.
Did you think that that was, wise?
I didn't think of anything. I just wanted to rescue it. Well, that was one of the very first bikini. My sister had sent it from Paris to me.
What colour was it?
Dark blue with red flowers on it. Very Hawaiian type of thing.
She was medically trained, apparently, and she stayed on the beach for 2 days, tending our wounded.
I remember one tank blowing up not very far from me, and I thought, well, what am I doing there? But I couldn't go back, so I still went on.
Walking up from the beach to go into the minefield, an old French lady gave me a silver chain with a crucifix on, a silver crucifix. And I carried it right through the war. Whether she was trying to thank me or whether she was giving it me, hoping that it did save me, sort of thing. But I think it did.
As the battle for Normandy developed, the British fighter the Typhoon became a vital weapon. It cleared the way for the advancing Allied armies by attacking the superior German tanks and by taking out enemy strongpoints. But always, it dived into the heart of the enemy defences, and casualties were high.
In, I suppose, 10 or 14 days after D-Day, we must have lost a similar number of pilots. When you think there's only about 20-odd in a squadron, you can see that it does get a bit unnerving, really, if somebody's not coming back from each sortie you do.
Gordon Stokes, an Australian, was shot down the day after D-Day.
I came across some letters which had been written to him by a young lady. She was married, and he had been carrying on what is grandly called an affair these days with her. And I didn't know what to do, whether I should return the letters to her, obviously not send them to his parents. And I did ask advice from the wing commander, and he said, oh, best thing is forget all about it, do nothing, burn the letters and forget all about it.
Is that what you did?
Well, I did, actually, but I think it was wrong because I imagine that she waited, no doubt, for months to find out what had happened to him. I was, of course, packing up kit all the time, which is not a pleasant sort of thing, really, going through the kit and packing it up and sending it back home.
How did you cope with that job? I mean, these were people you'd known for years.
Well, it was difficult, I suppose. I mean, I must admit that I suppose it was drink, really. You could sleep at night. I found, anyway, I found that drink a few pints of beer, you slept at night, and it was all right, actually. But otherwise, you could, be worried about what was going to happen the following day, because, if you'd survived one day, you'd got the following day to face it all again.
They were much more
menacing. I think they really wanted to kill you. They were passionately anxious to be good soldiers and to win the war. I was passionately anxious to survive the war, at any cost, I think. If I'd have been able to have a pact with the devil to translate me back into a safe billet in Blighty, I would have taken that bargain, I think, on pretty well any terms at all.
I had a very vivid picture of how I would die, as I'd seen other people die. I used to say to myself each day, this day I am very likely to die. And I had the feeling that if I did not say that to myself, the day that I forgot to say that, I would die. Dying was, of course, the most prominent, but not the only fear that we had, but it was one that did come to us constantly, of course, in the morning, in the night, during the day, when we were preparing for attack.
Did you ever forget to say that mantra to yourself?
Yes, ironically, I did, and it was the time when, in fact, I was wounded.
The troops are pushing ahead in this easily defended country, but the French don't call this the hedgerow country. They call it the bocage. The war is going slowly here, and recently it much resembles the trench warfare of a quarter-century ago.
By June 12th, 6 days after D-Day, the beachheads had joined hands. Yet some first-day objectives, including Caen, hadn't yet been taken, so fiercely did the Germans fight.
We were especially very, very familiar with the ground. We knew every hedge, every little road, every village, every orchard. We knew exactly, even by night.
There was good troops, and there was fanatics, because they believed that they was more or less invincible. They believed in the fatherland, and Hitler was the tops.
It was a very terrible weapon and a very secret weapon. Sometimes the Germans would run away, sometimes they did not, and whenever we did in fact catch enemy within the flame, it was a very horrible thing to see afterwards. There was a counterattack by a German SS unit, and the commander of the troop, it was the commander's tank that broke down, and his crew were taken out of their tank and were lined up and were shot by the SS. And that was clearly because they had been identified as the crew of a crocodile flamethrower. And from then on, I think all of us were taking good care that we would not be taken prisoner, at least.
The corn was so high, and hedgerows were so thick, and the men were being picked off. Some Canadians happened to move across our sector, and the D Company commander said to me, just go and look along there, Padre. And I did, and there were about 12 of our men, Canadians, that had been shot in the head. The hands were tied behind. Well, what I did do was to cut the bonds and turn them over. I wasn't going to leave them like that. but it's something I've never spoken of before.
Why did you do that? After all, the Germans had committed a war crime.
It was a war crime, but I got men that were really in the thick of things. It could have undermined their...
morale?
Yes, I think it could.
You have to go through it to be able to understand what a soldier goes through on the front line. You got to walk in the man's shoes before you know what he went through. That's something we don't like to talk too much about. But
what do you mean?
Well, it's too painful, really, to talk of all these boys that you know you're in the same hut with them. Like I had a couple of boys that, one of them that was in the double bunk, he was in the bunk above me. He was one of the ones that was murdered by Kurt Meyer's SS.
There were needless killings on both sides, but here at l'Abbaye d'Ardennes near Caen, evidence of an SS massacre of Canadians was discovered by the family of Jacques VICO, who lived nearby. Since 1942, VICO had been on the run in the French resistance. His family were imprisoned. In 1944, his mother returned home and noticed an oddity in the Abbaye garden.
Snowdrops which grew around the lawn before the war started to grow in the middle. So my mother said, the Germans have moved the earth. They have redone the lawn and hidden something. They searched and found the first 8 bodies of the Canadian soldiers who were assassinated at l'Abbaye d'Ardennes.
How many Canadians were shot there?
20 Canadian soldiers and officers were assassinated at the Abbaye d'Ardennes. The killing of these men led to the trial for war crimes of a German officer called Kurt Meyer, who was responsible for the 12th Panzer SS.
Un officier allemand qui était Kurt Meyer, qui était responsable de la 12e Panzer SS.
During this hearing, the Canadian and British authorities accused him of killing 139 Canadian soldiers in l'Abbaye d'Ardennes and the surrounding area.
L'Abbaye d'Ardennes, Raux, Audrieux, Cheux et le Ménilpatrie.
And the things we heard, what the SS did, the brutality, the torture, the unwanted killing of civilians to gain information. And we realized that these weren't soldiers, these were trained killers, perverted to the degree that anything they did to win the war was justifiable. And
how did you feel about that?
I hated them. The German soldier, I had no fight with them. I mean, we only killed German soldiers to save our lives.
I cannot hate. Never I have hated them in person. I cannot.
And yet you've killed.
It was a question, he or me. It's not hate. It's a difference. It's a German. We made no war. Kill, 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 like the American.
Thou shalt not kill is the first of the 10 Commandments. This is the only thing I'm having trouble with. Someday I'm going to have to answer for taking lives. There were times I could have shot Germans that I didn't. And I'm being very honest for the first time. I think I tried to atone for the lives that I know I took.
Atoning by sparing other lives?
Yes. It may have been wrong. If I'd have said that, well, I might have been a soldier, there might have been a reprimand handed to me, but I can say it now.
This is country with its defensive positions built in. The Germans just hide on one side of the hedge-enclosed field, and the open space in front gives them a field of fire for 100 yards or more.
The war was a very defining moment because it gave me back an identity, which the emigration from Germany and then the emigration from Italy had diminished.
Gave you an identity?
As a human being, as a member of the human family, as belonging to a country and being given a job to do for that country.
By the time you were in the army, were your parents naturalized Americans?
No, they had to wait the regular 5 years. It took 5 years of residence to become naturalized. And the fact that I was naturalized in the army did not help them one bit.
So they were still Germans?
They were still Germans, or enemy aliens.
How did you feel towards these soldiers dressed in grey?
I felt a little amused. Here's the other side. Here are the guys. Here is the side that had sort of kicked us out. And here I was coming back and sort of besting them.
I've never seen a place so completely obliterated. Chile has just ceased to exist. Every house, every building is just absolutely, utterly a ruin. There was a horrible reek of death and destruction. The bodies were lying there in the ruins and along the roadside, terrible to look at.
I remember getting out of my tank on this bright, sunny day and coming on the first German dead whom I'd seen who were not really, as it were, blown to pieces. And they were young men, young Germans, typical young Germans with blonde hair, and they had these wonderful teeth, and around their mouths were these masses of flies. We came on one, and he had a Luger pistol strapped to his side. And we were, all of us, Lugers were the great booty that you could find. And I was with a friend and a comrade from my tank, and he said, "Oh, that's yours, you take it." And I remember steeling myself to reach down and take this pistol from the German's holster, congealed as it was amid all the blood, because I felt I was under test from my crew member. And that was the most vivid picture. And I compared these Germans who were really so handsome with the average British soldier who was all shapes and sizes, an absolute Sergeant Mayor's nightmare. And yet we were the ones who had achieved victory, and the handsome Germans, the ones who had lost out to us.
Did you take the Luger?
I took the Luger, yes. I remember swapping it some months later for a large number of Chesterfield cigarettes.
We had two wards joined by sisters' little annex. Germans there, British there, and the Germans came in, and the first thing they wanted to know was who was the most senior person amongst them. So he was elected tent meister, which is absolute nonsense. And every time a sister or a doctor came into that ward, this man would scream out, "Achtung," and these poor devils who were lying in their beds had to lie to attention. And one night, one of them very tremulously started off on Lily Marlene, wondering if he was going to be clapped in jail for singing, but actually we were delighted to hear somebody singing. And then this astonishing thing happened, that in the other ward of the British, who of course were very fond of Lily Marlene as well, it was a desert marching song which they'd pinched from the Germans, they took up the same song. And there we had these two loads of people who just about a few hours before had been trying their best to blow each other's heads off, singing together, Lily Marlene. It was quite ridiculous. It shows how stupid war is, doesn't it?
For Sunday, July the 2nd, they arranged a little concert, and local talent presented some musical numbers, and an American soldier, Hungarian-born, named Leslie Bartal, who had been a concert pianist in his prior life, played some Chopin, I forget what else, of Mademoiselle Gautier, the mayor's daughter, who sang an aria from Madame Butterfly.
What was that afternoon for you?
It was a strange mixture of past and present. Past because I had studied some music before, past because it was a civilian occasion, a cultural occasion in the midst of war. And here I was in my uniform, part of the American army, sitting in on a concert which they billed as the first cultural event in liberated France.
You were filled with a sense of power. It was almost a religious feeling as you see these trucks rolling in, everything rolling. 6-8 hours, an unbroken line of equipment, troops and everything else. The war was important to me. It was a great commitment. I think it was to so many people of my generation.
Within a year, Hitler was defeated and the world began to try to put itself back together again. But for those who'd fought in Normandy, life was never quite the same again.
Did you use anything that you learned in those weeks and months in the career that came later?
Discipline. I mean that. I was a hard-working, disciplined actor. You can call me a journeyman actor if you like. But I think a lot of my luck and success stemmed partly from the fact that I didn't argue about salaries or anything. I just reckoned I was damn lucky to be alive, to be there at all.
It was hell at times. And to be in an experience of that nature and sharing it with the men, it left its mark on me. I shall never forget it. It's gone too deep for that.
When you think you've played around and drank and laughed and had fun and played sports together and then go into combat together and you see that very same, very lively guy laying there dead as a doornail and looking so helpless, you can't get it out of your mind. I can't get it out of my mind.
There are two wars, and I think if you live through a war in a headquarters war, your experiences are quite different, and I think you come out a bit ashamed of yourself because it's been too easy.
You depended on one another from hour to hour for survival. You identified completely with one another. And I use the term in its purest sense. I think that as men, we really all learned to love one another.
This person is so integral a part of yourself. You do anything for them. You just. It isn't a sexual love. It's a deeper love that I can express. It's just something. You're so glad to have their friendship.
When the war was over, we all went our different ways, and I think a lot of us, and I certainly, in my life after that, looked continually, but vainly, to find this kind of closeness that we had there. It simply was not ever to be achieved again.